fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Arthur.
And it's now officially the month of February, the shittiest month of the year in Canada, anyway.
Yep.
I don't know how anybody else feels about
And
it.
it's an extra day long.
Oh, God. Oh, it is
Yeah.
this year? That's sad.
It's 29 days, as far as I know.
I don't like that. It's mostly just because I'm exaggerating, but also it is very cold at this time of year. We tend to get the most snow.
Yep. And I have to clean the car twice a day.
Twice a day, every
hate
day, to go back and forth from work, walking to and from the car is unpleasant. Like today, just even walking home off the bus was freezing, and it's like a 4-minute walk, and it was horrible.
Thank God for remote starters.
Honestly. But anyway, so I think to give ourselves a little bit of a break for the month of February, we figured that this month we would just have some fun episode times, in the sense that we would just brainstorm some ideas, come up with some topics that we have never really covered on the podcast before, and then actually take the time to do a little bit of research and get into them a little bit more. So we're kicking things. I love that. I'm like, we're being happy, but we're kicking things off with a really depressing topic.
It's not romance.
Not yet. So this week we're going to be talking about both apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic novels for adults, right? We've talked about dystopian stuff in the past, and delved into a lot of what, this is mine and Shireen's fault completely, but a lot of the adaptations that we wind up watching and things are young adult, because it's just what we're more familiar with and what we're more comfortable with. But I thought it might be about time that we got a little bit more into some things for grown-ups and took ourselves out of the YA sphere for a change, particularly with things like, apocalypse stories and things like that as well. So we're going to, chat through, I guess, the overall differences between apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, dystopian, all those kinds of aspects of things, in both how they're different and also how they all kind of mesh together with one another as well. There's a lot of overlap. Some examples that fall into how when I was doing some research anyway, I noticed a pretty big disparity in just looking through very big lists of apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic novels, what a lot of the themes are in them, and what the main storyline is. Right. A lot of them have a ton of the same tropes in them, obviously, that come back. They manifest themselves in different ways, but they're very similar in a lot of ways. That's it. And just talk through maybe why the tone is so different in a regular adult apocalyptic novel versus a YA one,
Yeah.
Okay, before we get into all of that aspect of things, we'll do a little what's on our nightstands to kick things off a little bit, so we keep things, a little happier before we get into the sad.
Well, I have a new book, finally, because it takes me forever to read.
It doesn't.
But, well...
Only if you don't take the time to read. That's all. That's all it is. Fair. It's not like you're a slow reader.
No.
So,
I guess.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, it's called Advent by Seth Ring, and is releasing, I want to say next month.
March 4th? March
something like that,
8th?
yeah.
Shit.
It's early March. It is a very different one for me, because Seth Ring does a lot of LitRPG, which is not a genre I knew existed before.
You want to walk the kids through what that is? Because you said it to me the other day, and I was like, what?
Well, so to be fair, I had no idea what it is until I started reading it,
Okay.
and then it kind of clicked in my head what it is. So it is RPG, video games literature, right? So role-playing game literature.
Okay.
And essentially... So when I started reading it, I was kind of really thrown off by the way that it is written, until I realized, and it clicked in my head, that no, wait, this is LitRPG. This is not any kind of other book that you would read. So the style of writing is quite different. But it is fun to read, especially if you're a gamer or if you're into RPG, tabletop games, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because it reads basically like you are following a character and he's progressing through the levels.
Levels in a game.
Okay. Essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. So you follow through his progress, and he does the trainings, and he gets stronger, and he unlocks new abilities, and you're like, oh shit, that's really cool. What can I do with it? And it builds on top of it and builds on top of it until, you reach some kind of a preliminary enemy, and you train on that, and there's probably going to be a big boss and a denouement and everything. So yeah, it is a different genre to read. I don't hate it. It is certainly new to me. But once it clicked in my head that this is LitRPG and not like, the other stuff that I read.
Not like a more common like fiction in this sense.
Yeah. It actually made it better.
Sure.
In a sense. So I'm seeing it as basically I'm playing a video game, but I'm
in your head
also
because you're reading it. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense.
So it's pretty cool.
And this is the beginning of a series, if I'm not mistaken,
It's
right?
the beginning of a series. He already has titles for a lot of them.
Oh, wow.
I think there's like 5 or 6 books that Seth Ring has planned for Advent. It's part of the Exilian.
I think it's Exlian.
Exlian.
I think that was what was indicated on the cover anyway. I read it briefly, but
yeah. It's that whole kind of like new universe that he's unlocking because I think he's written already like, I don't remember, 4 series or 3 series that are different. So it's part of a new one. It's the first book. So far, it is very interesting. I'm only like, I don't know, a quarter of the way through. But
all I cared about is that you told me there was a cat. So
there is a cat and it's really funny.
Yeah, that's cute.
What about you?
I feel like I have so many to go through.
We'll go over the cool one.
Okay, well, so I just finished a novel being published on February 11th, actually. So like when you guys hear this, like coming up very, very soon, next week, literally, called The Perfect Rom-Com by Melissa Ferguson, who's written a number, I think a good 5 or 6 romance novels, if I'm not mistaken. She's got quite a few under her belt. People will probably recognize the name. The basic premise of the novel is that it follows a young woman who's an aspiring writer who is attending a writer's conference in order to pitch her first novel, essentially, to multiple different editors and publishers and agents and see if someone will pick up her work and potentially get it published. She comes into contact with an agent who, doesn't really want to publish her book initially because he's like, there's too much work to be done on it. It's too long, like multiple notes, but agrees to work with her anyway. And anyway, I don't want to give too much about it away because I wouldn't want to spoil it for people. But anyway, she winds up coming on board with him to do something completely different and kind of winds up going down a road towards like improving her writing, improving herself and how she feels about her work. There are a ton of themes to do with, obviously, so like trope wise, if we're talking about romance, trope wise is like a friends to lovers kind of thing. Right. Very slow burn for sure in terms of like how much the friendship builds up and stuff between the two of them, as well as just like kind of a cast of really kooky characters because this her day job is that she's an ESL teacher, so an English second language teacher at a school. And so, they're surrounded by her like cast of very funny foreign students on a regular basis because it's all like adult students, right?
Yeah.
Who are doing continuing ed. So it's just like a fun cast of characters, fun, like, very like sort of like light humor and stuff like that. Low spice, if it's not your thing to have like very spicy, it falls into that like semi-Hallmark wheelhouse to an extent, but it's quite charming, I will say. And I actually did like the story. It was really fun. So by the time, maybe not by the time you guys hear this episode, but within a very short period of time after that, we'll have a full review up on the website that will have probably a few more spoilers in it. So just be aware of that, as well as more than likely an interview with Melissa Ferguson, the author, as well, to give like maybe a little bit more insight into some of that as well. So that's great.
That's awesome.
I'm looking forward to that. And then on top of that, just add it to the pile because apparently what I've discovered my thing is that if I'm reading a hardcover, I don't want to bring it with me like in my bag to go to work in the morning. So I always just have like another book in my bag.
Yeah. That's very heavy.
Yeah. So I'm 2/3 of the way through Fourth Wing. Yes, I know. I'm only reading it now. Blah, 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 blah. I know. This is not me yelling at you. I'm yelling at Shireen because when she listens to this episode, she's going to be like, finally. So and that's it. I'm like 2/3 of the way through Fourth Wing. Yes, I get the hype. Obviously, the dragons are fucking cool. Obviously. But it's a good story and I'm really enjoying it so far. And I'm also reading a novel. My go-to-work book is a novel called This Will Be Fun by an author named E.B. Asher, which is a little more like cozy fantasy, I would say, but it's got like an epic kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, like a Princess Bride style fantasy feel to it, about 4 heroes who 10 years before went on this massive quest to save a princess from a horrible villain. They succeeded, but it cost them a lot personally, emotionally, mentally, all of these things. And it essentially kind of ruined their lives. And now we were jumping forward 10 years to that princess now being queen and getting married. None of these people have spoken in the last decade because of many reasons that I won't spoil. And they all wound up being brought back together for her wedding, essentially, and kind of wind up on another quest, even though they don't want to be on one. But it's really fun. I really like the characters, which I feel is really important in this style fantasy. If you don't like the characters, why the fuck are you reading it? And it's good. Like, the banter is great. Overall, like, the storyline's really fun. So I'm really liking it. Cool. That was one that I just, like, picked up on the fly, and I'm glad that I did. So.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah. So that's all of mine. Sorry. That's too many books, but here we are. Anyway, okay, yeah, let's talk about some apocalyptic stuff, shall we?
Apocalyptic.
So, okay, obviously, there are a few differences to kind of be aware of when you're going into something like this. So you've got apocalyptic novels, post-apocalyptic novels, and then dystopian. And I feel like all of them kind of mesh together because the majority of them have an overlap of at least one or two of those.
Yeah, usually if you have a dystopian novel, you probably have some post-apocalyptic element to it. Exactly. How did it come about?
And like the apocalyptic ones can turn into post-apocalyptic depending on like the time span during which like the novel itself is set and takes place, right? So it's, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot of those things together.
Actually, the Stand is kind of like that.
Exactly.
Apocalyptic into post-apocalyptic.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
There are a lot of, I think there are quite a few of those, aren't there? Anyway, yeah. Or like at least ones where they give you enough like flashbacks.
Yeah.
That it kind of winds up being that anyway. Yeah. I don't know. Generally speaking, I would say if you're going to, you know, talk about like the adult versions of all of these stories, I find most of the time you get into like much darker themes. Like the subject matter will be a lot darker than like in a YA novel. Not that it won't be. Not like YA novels get into some pretty dark shit as well in these kinds of stories. No, but it's going to be
more like realistic.
But it feels more, I guess it feels more real. The stakes feel higher, generally speaking, for the characters. Like I find like a main character, like the book may very well end, your main character dies. Like it's like a lot, much more likely to happen than like in a YA story, which is like a lot less common, I find anyway. You know, and like the circumstance, like even if they do make it to the end, the circumstances are probably not as ideal or as hopeful in tone as they would be necessarily with something like a YA story, which tends to be a little more like, you know, like, yes, we have like our Hunger Games and we have like our things like that, but those tend to have like a more, like a fun feel to them anyway in comparison because there's like a game involved. So anyway, I feel like you can kind of split these into different categories. One thing that I noticed when I was looking things up and researching a bit was that like, wow, in the adult like sphere, the vast majority of these novels have something to do with a disease, a virus, an infection, something that has overcome or is overcoming the population at a particular time, whether it's happening at that time or it's already taken place by the time the novel kicks off, like a ton of them. And I was just like going through, I'm like, yep, this one. So like, obviously you just mentioned The Stand by Stephen King, obviously very much along those lines. A deadly flu virus essentially infects, you know,
everyone very quickly.
Everyone, at the very least across America. We don't know about the rest of the world, obviously, but at the very least across the States. And sends everything into an apocalypse, essentially. Girl with All the Gifts, a little bit more post-apocalyptic. It's a number of years after, again, a virus has like infected and killed the majority of the population, and there are children being studied at a facility, basically, in order to potentially find a cure, if possible. The Fireman by Joe Hill, who's Stephen King's son, so that's funny. But anyway, which I have not read, but my understanding is that it involves some sort of infection that causes people to wind up with really bad like scars, like burn scars almost on them, but it will also set them on fire eventually. So it's almost like they're spontaneously combusting.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And so, that's a disease?
Yeah, apparently it seems to be like something they call it like dragon scale or something, and it spreads to people.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I like that he's staying close to his dad's genre or crazy ideas.
Mm-hmm. There's a novel called The End of Men by Christina Sweeney Baird, which is pretty much what you think it is by hearing the title. Essentially, again, like a virus or an infection that's spread, like a disease that has spread, but only affects the male population.
Oh, that's nice.
And women are picking up and trying to figure out like how to reorganize things, essentially, once all of that's left behind. I mean, you know, there's a lot to think about in terms of also like eventually the entire population will die out. So
exactly.
What does that mean? There's a novel called Severance by Ling Ma, which I know is quite popular. God, it popped up on a ton of lists anyway, which is, I think, like a slightly quieter one, but essentially about, again, like a disease that overtakes people, but it basically makes them like listless and tired and like whatever, like sort of like depressed to the extent that they essentially rot away.
Oh, so like My Usual Friday.
Ha ha, so funny. You know, so that one takes like a slightly different tone, but again, like the idea is the same. Obviously, I'm Legend by Richard Matheson, which is like a zombie vampire hybrid. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of the way to describe it.
Kind of.
I did like it though. That was a different variation, and also they're like not fully, like they're dead, but they also, at least some of them have some kind of consciousness or ability to talk or communicate.
Kind of,
that's
yeah.
what it was. And yeah, that kind of like threw it into an interesting thing when there's like one person left, at least in wherever you are.
Yeah.
In that situation, and he's, you know, kind of almost going crazy, but also because he's alone.
Because he's been alone for ages.
Yeah, but then he also has to survive because, you know, they come out and will try to kill you.
Try to eat you.
And try to have you become them, essentially. So it's kind of like, you know, one against everyone.
Yeah.
Or is it everyone against him? Because from their perspective, since they have some kind of thinking ability of some sorts, they're not just like brain dead zombies. Maybe he is the one who is abnormal. Yeah. Right?
True.
So they're trying to convert him. Yeah.
That one's definitely more like post-apocalyptic. Like we're following the main character, like, you know, after this has occurred, and then you have something like World War Z by Max Brooks, which follows it as it's happening.
Yeah.
Right? Like and that one's like a straight fucking zombie book, obviously. That one is like as the, you know, zombie infestation is overtaking basically the entire planet. It's quite far reaching, that one, from what we see.
Well, I mean, so like what is the easiest way to have an apocalypse, right? Like you said, nuclear war, most likely, a pandemic, environmental collapse, or some kind of an invasion, like an alien invasion, right?
I feel like we've been proven. I feel like if we're going with the realism aspect of it, it's pretty much been proven to us that it's a pandemic that's going to do it. Like, I think so. Maybe nuclear shit too, or environmental.
Yeah, I think those two ones.
All of these things are less likely than an alien invasion, is what I'm trying to say, basically.
You don't know.
I mean, okay, fine, whatever, okay. And then there's something like, I know Station 11, which is a Canadian novel, actually, by Emily St. John Mandel, I'm not sure, was a super popular one, too, which is essentially about a traveling group of actors, like a theater troupe, basically, 20-odd years after, again, like an infection basically has wiped out much of the population who travel around Canada putting on like Shakespeare plays and stuff, but they also like they get wrapped up in like a ton of figuring out like what happened to different people and stuff who they knew like when they were kids 20 years ago and things like that. Anyway, that one was massively popular when it came out. I still see it all over the place when I go to the bookstore. Yeah. But yeah, that's it. Like you said, if you're going to go in the total opposite direction, you have something like an invasion of some kind. So you've got like your War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, obviously.
Yeah.
Your Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, which is also a very popular story. That one I know is because the invasion causes like plants that try to kill you.
Okay, cool.
That one. Get behind it. That one's a big one. For sure. And also, I guess I feel like a lot of the, and I know we went through like a whole period of that in like the 50s and the 60s, but I feel like a lot of the alien invasion stuff or whatever, not that you don't see it now, it is published now, but I feel like a lot of those ones that you see that are like really popular are like much older stories, like War of the Worlds and stuff. These things were published ages ago.
Yeah, for sure. And like,
you know, I'm not saying you don't see it because like, look, like what a 3-body problem and stuff obviously posits that kind of idea in terms of an invasion and what's coming for people and everything. So it's not to say that it isn't published, but you can tell like how long the thought of an alien invasion has existed.
Yeah, well, because the thing with alien invasion back in the days, it was very literally like alien land on Earth and then they destroy stuff.
In their spaceship.
Now it's a little bit different. Like the 3-body problem, yes, there's a species coming, but they have different motives or ulterior, like they tell you that what the motive is, but it's not necessarily what you think it is. And there's like technology involved, and there's a survival aspect.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a little bit different from what it
and
was
like
before.
obviously more because they know it's happening in like a few hundred years. There's like more time to try to prepare for it or to try to dissuade it from
very
happening.
Specific. I'm
but-
saying in general now,
Yeah.
like the themes with an invasion would be a little bit different than just they have come here to conquer us.
Agreed.
Because if not, it's been overdone
So many
and you have to
times,
make it different enough.
Exactly. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
for sure. And then the other one that actually, like when I was thinking about this, it made me think of it, that I wrote down is called Black Tide by an author named Casey Jones, which actually I think I had gotten an advanced copy from NetGalley, if I'm not mistaken, like a couple of years ago before it was published. And that one is basically, it is like two people, a man and a woman, who meet because they have like adjoining like beach houses that they're staying at. They spend a night together, and then the next day, as they're kind of basically overnight after the night that they spend together, an invasion of some sort occurs, and they're not super aware of what's going on. So they try to leave the next day and are like, have to survive basically the whatever types of creatures these are who have like shown up near where they're staying, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like very tense. I would say it was the atmosphere in that one because they don't know what the fuck is going on.
Right, yeah. So I mean, like it kind of puts the reader in the shoes of like if it were to happen tomorrow.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Because it's totally from their perspective, so it's not like they can barely
there's
posit
no
a theory as
information.
to what
Exactly.
that's it. It's very like Cloverfield, you know what I mean? Like you're only following regular people who have no idea what could actually be happening type of thing. You have no other input of any sort. And then that's it. You get to your other type of story, which is like, that's it, some sort of like environmental or like nuclear disaster or whatever that's like wiped out a large portion of the population or done something to the planet overall that's caused some sort of chain of events to occur, obviously. So like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, probably one of the biggest ones there. Incredibly wonderfully well respected and well written book. Incredibly well written book. Very sad. Very bleak. The movie is also very bleak. We did an episode about it last year, maybe, I think at some point. Great film. So depressing. So sad, but very, very well done. That's a parable of the sour. I feel like I'm mispronouncing that. By Octavia E. Butler, which also again has been that one. I believe that apocalypse has occurred because of some sort of like combination of factors. So like environmental and like drugs that have killed out a large portion of the population, and then like other things, like a whole bunch together.
That's cool. Mix it all together.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That one, which kind of involves like all of those things. That's a really, really popular one. And there's also there's a novel as well that I came across that I have not read called The Last by an author named Hannah Jameson, which that one is, again, it does kind of the same thing that Black Tide does, is my understanding, where like basically a man is staying at a very remote hotel in, I believe, the Swiss Alps. Mm-hmm. And while he is there and doesn't really have much connection to anything, there's like some sort of massive nuclear disaster that wipes out a ton of the planet. And it's sort of like, how do you kind of figure out that something has happened? How does he like move forward and try to do anything else?
No, you don't. Stay at the hotel.
Yeah, I guess
Don't
you just
leave.
live there forever. That's it. Exactly. So it's just, but the idea of like how, you know, if you're in like a major city and something happens, you know about it right away. But if you're out in the middle of nowhere, like it can take a while for you to be aware that anything has happened in the first place, right?
Hey, I just gotta say, if it's a zombie apocalypse, we have a plan.
Okay.
We do, and I told you about it.
Do we have a plan?
Yes, we have a plan, and I told you about it multiple times. If you don't remember, it's okay, because I do.
Okay, that's fine. I love that you're just like not sharing it with anyone. Like, it's my plan.
No, it's my plan. I'm not gonna tell. I mean, look, all I'm gonna say is don't go to Costco. Go to their fulfillment center.
Go to the fulfillment center.
No one will go there. Everyone goes to Costco.
True enough. Yeah. Oh, and another thing that I did kind of notice is that you definitely have like multiple novels like this that can involve, because in like the post-apocalyptic side of things, why is the cat meowing? Mooncake.
Because he's on the counter.
I hope nobody can hear that. It's just like little chirps in the background.
It's gonna great keep this.
Anyway. Oftentimes they involve, because like, if you're jumping into post-apocalyptic and dystopian ages later, they involve some sort of like new order or dictatorship or something, right? So like Handmaid's Tale obviously is a perfect example of that. And then something like, what's that other one? Fahrenheit 451.
Right.
By Ray Bradbury as well has like a very distinct feel like that to it also. Those are the kinds of things that you see, like, 1984. Like those are the kinds of things that you see that pop up in these types of stories, right? Where it's like, this one is fully post-apocalyptic because like this happened ages ago. And then like, it's taken us years. And now this is like the order of things. This is how we do everything now. But most of the time it's really fucked up. Whatever it is that they're doing, it's usually some sort of horrible dictatorship.
It's very rare that it gets better.
Yeah. Really, like I don't think there's a better example than The Handmaid's Tale for that.
Yeah. I would probably also throw in The Dark Tower in there. I know you haven't read it. I read all of them.
Yeah.
And it is kind of like, well, it's not kind of, it's like many, many, many years later after what we led to believe that it's a post-apocalyptic world.
Okay.
But it is also like, it has regressed, I guess, which would naturally happen after post-apocalyptic world, but it is almost like a cowboy world.
Oh, yeah, it's like the Old West.
Yeah, the Old West with like magic and stuff, and they believe in kind of crazy stuff. It is actually a great read. And if you haven't tried it...
Well, you love that series.
I loved it. It was incredible. The first book, a little bit maybe drier to read, but also to be fair, from what I read about it, is that Stephen King published it when he was like in his 20s or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he realized how much of a big undertaking this is going to be. And then he only published, I think, the second or the third book much, much later in his life when he actually has refined his craft and got much better at it. So like, get through the first book, and then by book 2 or 3... it gets so good. Yeah. Like, it gets so much better, and there's 7 of them.
Yeah.
Or 8, and it's worth it. It's very, very worth it. And also, it ties in a bunch of his other books. So if you're like a Stephen King fan,
it's true. If you've read a bunch of them, I think you're going to find Easter eggs like all over the place as you go through the series.
Actually, it basically ties in The Stand. At least a lot of characters from The Stand.
I mean, a major character from The Stand is a major character in the Dark Tower series, isn't he?
Yep. Yeah. Rick Flag.
Randall Flagg. Randall Flagg.
Randall Flagg. Well, he has a lot of names.
I know. They call him like 7 different things. Yeah. That's true because he's like the major antagonist in The Stand as well, and basically is in the Dark Tower, at least for a portion of it. Anyway. The whole time.
He's his main enemy. He's the goal.
Okay.
Well, part of the goal. He's the one who has Roland, who's the main character, try to dissuade him from achieving his goal, which is reaching the Dark Tower.
Right. Okay.
So,
cool.
Yeah. So a lot of books, a lot of different types of stories and everything. Why would you say like this remains a pretty popular genre? Or like we have them keep publishing and people love it still?
Man, oh man. I feel like real world experiences really feed into, I mean, it makes so much sense, right? Everybody always says with authors and stuff, oh, you write what you know. Yeah. And so I think it's so... understandable, not easy, but understandable for authors to pull from either things that they're experiencing firsthand or things that they are witnessing happening in the world at any given time in their lives, to take that experience and to mold it into something that, yes, is fictional, however, does really reflect like what they can see maybe is currently happening or will happen down the line should society continue to make the choices that it continues to make.
Exactly.
Right?
Like a bit of an extrapolation of what is going on, and then there you go.
Absolutely.
And it also creates that kind of like the what if scenario.
Yes.
Without the real world consequences.
Yeah.
And like we've seen how Marvel What If, at least season 1, was so popular and everything, because it's a lot of, what would happen if we changed this small thing, or if we kept going with, the pandemic, what if it continued for another couple of years? And
exactly. That's it.
So that's it. It's kind of like the collective anxieties that we have about
things, and that it's so normal that it manifests itself in art in different ways, shape, or form, right? Like I think you know, and I know like a lot of people don't want to get like political with things and whatever, but like, you know, like reading is political because of course all these different books tackle so many different types of issues, right? In terms of, I mean, like, you know, that's it again, like things like 1984, like The Handmaid's Tale, like Fahrenheit 451, like, you know, book burnings, women being used as breeding cattle essentially, and being repressed, you know, that's it, a dictatorship that watches everything that you do all the time.
And literally changes history depending on what's going on.
Exactly.
So there's no truth.
You know, and then even getting into other sides of it that aren't just like, oh, quote unquote political. We get it. Okay, people don't want to talk about politics because it's depressing. But like, you know, like getting into like other aspects of it, something like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and the idea of the environmental damage that we've done having such a severe potential repercussion.
Of course.
Even though it's not explicitly stated in the story, we just know that like basically the sun stopped working, and like we get no light anymore or anything, and like what would happen to the planet if that were to happen and stuff, and all of the repercussions and things, and they would be horrific, of course.
It will happen eventually.
Yeah.
You're all going to be safe.
Yeah, God, we'll all be dead, but, you know.
A lot of millions and millions of years before the sun naturally dies out.
Yes, more than likely. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that right now, but, you know, and there's nothing we can do about it anyway.
No. And also, like, it has a lot of other things that I think kind of, like, keeps it relevant.
Yeah.
Not just because of what is happening in the world. Like, you know, we had the pandemic and the threat of war that is always somehow looming in the background.
Threat, like it's what's happening, you know?
Yeah, but I mean like major world wars and stuff. There's also kind of like the exploration of human nature, right? In a sense of like, how would you behave, or when you're reading, how do you think that character would behave, or how would we behave as a species or whatever it is when the civilization crumbles, right? Like, what do? Do you revert to savagery? Is there hope in rebuilding?
Yeah. And like, if we're honest about a lot of stuff during COVID, I don't think we'd do that well.
I mean, look,
I'm not saying that we wouldn't be able to.
50-50.
I'm not saying we wouldn't be able to pick ourselves up, but there is a potential quotient of the population that would not make it through that via their own decisions about things.
Also true, fair, but you know, we've seen bad things during the pandemic. We've also seen a lot of very good things, and the good news and people helping each other and everything. So there's
some hope in
there's
there.
some hope for a portion of the people.
I do hope that part of it does stay. Let's say like have that at least like more hopeful tone, the way that we were able to establish. I think once people got over the initial shock of a global pandemic being something that was happening, I think they were able to kind of even out a little bit that way. I'm not saying it was easy for everybody. It was horrible, but you know, like that we were kind of able to like try to look on the bright side of things, at least to a degree.
That's the only thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, right, that's it. So like when major events like this happen, you're kind of like, what's going to happen? You know, like, are we going to rebuild? Or are we just going to go crazy and then keep destroying because we're like, fuck it, you know, keep going.
Are we going to see something like In the Stand, you know, where like so much of the population in the world dies out, which like, wow. But there is still that sense
there's
of
a good camp and a bad camp.
reestablishing.
Exactly,
but there is still that sense of like, you know, reestablishing, rebuilding, restabilizing
That's it.
ourselves.
Yeah. And it explores kind of like the morality and leadership that arises in different situations, and also very extreme situations, and the ethics of survival.
Yeah, true.
Right? Like, what do? Do you just kind of like regress, I guess? Well, not regress, but like, do you do hunting and gathering, or do you just go and pillage? You know what I mean?
Yeah, is there like a reverting of
morality, really?
Well,
in a
of morality,
sense.
and that's it, of like general ways of living and things like that. Like, is that, you know, what needs to be done? Kind of thing, to go back to like a simpler way of living.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those things, and there's also the other, I think, two important factors is that a lot of the times the post-apocalyptic books and stories are not necessarily like super action-packed like sci-fi would be, in a sense,
not in
depending
the
on
same
what
way.
you're reading, but they explore a lot of emotional depth and kind of like character-driven stories, character building in those situations, right? A lot of the times it follows a specific character, a few of them, whatever it is, but it is definitely like built much deeper, and the relationship they form in those settings, right? And it's also kind of like I guess it provides inspiration from the characters who are against all odds, trying to survive, essentially.
Yeah, well,
right?
that's always what's fascinating with these stories, right?
Exactly.
It's like you're just like, who are these people who often in these novels? Now, not all of them, obviously. Some of them might involve people who are like scientists and actively working towards fixing the problem and things. However, I find a lot of the most popular ones really follow average people having to figure out how to navigate situations like this. And I think that that's something that's incredibly relatable for readers, right? You're, almost reading about yourself.
In a sense, yeah.
Like how is your average person who maybe doesn't have like a working knowledge of a lot of these things going to react in these situations, going to adjust in these situations and, attempt to move forward? Like what will be their way forward?
Yeah, exactly. And I think probably the last point of why it still is relevant or will probably be forever relevant, it's really just because like every generation has its own fears, right? So like
normally
there was
caused by real world events.
Exactly right. That's it. So there were wars, the
Yes.
whole alien thing, the space race, right? Like, we're like, what is
that
that gonna give us?
So much of what we were seeing,
Exactly right.
In like the 50s, 60s, 70s kind of era.
Absolutely. Now what do we have? Like we have the pandemic.
We live in a post 9/11 world as well,
Post
which I do think makes a difference.
We have climate disaster. We have the risks of AI and technology, right? This thing that we spoke about last week.
Yep.
So like there's always something happening in the world, and it will be different in certain cases, even though it could be about, kind of like the same thing. And remember, disaster is always similar, but it's also a little bit different every time.
But there will be differences because the experiences that every generation is living through are different.
Exactly. Yeah. So like it is ever evolving genre in that sense, so that it kind of, you're always within what is happening in the last 10 to 20 years, I guess.
And it will never, I don't think it will ever really completely die down because again, there will, always be different things happening in the world or different like major events that take place that will shape the literature that's being published.
Exactly. Yeah.
As well.
So that is something that I think a lot of those things are still keeping it relevant, and, depending on how you write it, obviously you have to adapt it for what is going on. And an alien invasion, like we said, shouldn't just be aliens coming around.
Exactly.
It has to be something different enough, but that makes it very relevant still.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, if you guys have good recommendations, suggestions, whatever, apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic novels that we, didn't really talk about at all or touch upon, I'm sure there are so many. It would be hard to get into like a ton of them. But anyway, let us know about kind of all of your feelings about that on all of our socials. So, Instagram, TikTok, Threads.
Blue Sky.
I'm going to keep forgetting it. At Fully Booked CA. And I think Blue Sky is Fully Booked _CA, is it?
I believe so. Just search Fully Booked .ca. You'll see it.
You'll find it. And they're all on the website as well at fullybooked.ca, where you can obviously find all of the content that we're putting out on a regular basis, including, like I said, my soon-to-be review of The Perfect Rom-Com and our interview with Melissa Ferguson as well. And we're going to...
Interviews with the authors. We recently had an interview with Jacqueline Faber, who wrote The Department.
The Department was just published, actually, recently.
And it's, getting really big. So we're glad that
really great thriller. Yeah, really great thriller. Our contributor, Claire, read the novel and loved it. Yeah. So that we were really excited to be able to talk to Jacqueline Faber about that as well. And that's it. I'm really looking forward to seeing like who else we might be able to chat with some
I think we have another 1 or 2 interviews lined up. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we're working on it. So anyway, if you guys want to check all that out, definitely feel free to check out the website. But until next week, guys, and another surprise episode coming your way. Keep on reading.
Ciao, guys.